So Donald Trump was standing on an airport tarmac, engines roaring behind him, when he said something most presidents never say out loud. And he didn't hedge. He didn't use diplomatic language. He didn't even pretend this was about norms or rules. He said, Venezuela took our oil. He said American companies were thrown out. And he said the United States wanted it back. Not influence, not stability, not cooperation. It's in that moment, Trump wasn't trying to persuade anybody. He was revealing an assumption, one he believed didn't even need defending. And that assumption was simple, that Venezuela's oil was never really Venezuela's oil to begin with. And Trump wasn't speaking as a rogue outsider. He was speaking as someone who believed the leverage still worked, that if the United States pushed hard enough, the outcome would be inevitable, that pressure would collapse resistance. And that time was on Washington's side. But that assumption was already outdated, even back then. Now, Trump believed he was enforcing power, but what he was actually doing was teaching the world how to hedge against it. And that's the part that rarely ever gets discussed. Because when Trump said, we want it back, he wasn't announcing a new strategy. He was exposing the emotional core of an old one. A strategy that assumes enforcement is permanent, compliance is cheaper than defiance, and alternatives don't matter. Now, that belief shaped everything that followed. When the Trump administration recognized Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president in 2019, it wasn't symbolic. That decision was enforced by Trump personally and upheld by his senior officials. It unlocked sanctions authority, asset seizures, and export restrictions targeting Venezuela's state oil company. Now, those actions produced immediate results. Oil production collapsed. Export revenue fell. U.S. government agencies later acknowledged that sanctions played a central role in the decline. So this was pressure applied deliberately, not by accident. But pressure only works if it produces submission. And this is where miscalculation begins on a gigantic scale. Because Trump escalated enforcement. Sanctions tightened. Maritime interdictions increased. Tankers hesitated. Insurers withdrew coverage. Shipments turned around mid-route. And these outcomes occurred because United States officials chose escalation over adjustment. Yet, even as enforcement intensified, something unexpected happened. Venezuela didn't fold. Instead, what it did is it absorbed pain and rerouted survival. China expanded its role as Venezuela's primary oil buyer. Russia increased technical cooperation. Shipping networks adapted, and payments shifted. So risk was priced in, not avoided. Trump allowed one exception, though. Chevron tankers continued moving. Others were blocked, though. And that selective enforcement mattered more than any speech. It signaled that pressure wasn't about law, it was about alignment. And alignment could be negotiated elsewhere. That lesson didn't stay in Venezuela. Governments across the global south were watching closely. They saw a sovereign state sanctioned for controlling its own resources. They saw enforcement applied selectively. They saw exemptions granted quietly, and they learned something crucial. U.S. pressure still hurts, but it's no longer absolute. This wasn't just about oil. It was about credibility. Sanctions are supposed to deter, but deterrence only works if alternatives are worse. Now, in Venezuela's case, compliance meant surrendering sovereignty. Defiance was costly, but it preserved autonomy and accelerated new partnerships. That choice reshaped incentives far beyond Venezuela. UN experts warned repeatedly that unilateral sanctions aimed at forcing political change violated international law and human rights norms. Those warnings were acknowledged and subsequently ignored. The strategy stayed in place because leaders chose not to change course. And that choice carried second-order effects. Venezuela's heavy crude requires imported refining inputs. Restrictions on those imports further reduced output. Food imports suffered, currency stability weakened, and humanitarian risks rose. These outcomes were not theoretical, they were documented. But the deeper consequence wasn't humanitarian, it was actually structural. Because every time enforcement is used this way, it trains others to prepare. China doesn't treat sanctions as deterrents. It treats them as engineering constraints. Russia reroutes flows. BRICS institutions expand settlements and alternatives. Trade routes diversify and financial architecture adapts. Each escalation accelerates learning. So Trump didn't invent this strategy. Obama actually maintained sanctions. Biden preserved core measures. Trump made the logic explicit that continuity matters. And here's the strategic judgment. The United States miscalculated by assuming economic pressure alone could reverse sovereign resource control without accelerating multipolar adaptation. Venezuela paid a heavy price, but it did not collapse into compliance. Instead, it became a case study, a demonstration of what happens when enforcement teaches resistance instead of obedience. So this isn't Western collapse, it's Western optionality. Pressure, it still exists, but it no longer commands automatic submission. And once compliance becomes optional, power is going to end up fragmenting. So the question now isn't whether Venezuela's oil belongs to Venezuela, which it does. That question was answered years ago. The real question is how many other countries are preparing for the moment when pressure arrives, and whether they will already have alternatives in place. Because the next time a leader stands on a tarmac and says, "We want it back," the world may quietly ask something else. Who still has the leverage to actually take it? All right, guys, do I have this all right? Do I have it all wrong? Please put it in the comment section below. I look forward to reading and replying to all of your guys' comments. And thank you guys so much for watching me here on The Baseline. All right, cheers, everybody.